The party was packed, music thumping, people squeezed into every corner, red solo cups everywhere. It was your typical college party. I wasn't really feeling it, but I went because some of my friends insisted. The house was in a sketchy part of town, but it was big and had this creepy, unfinished basement that some people were hanging out in. After a while, I got bored and decided to go downstairs to see what was happening. A small group was playing beer pong and others were just chilling, talking. But there was this one guy I noticed right away. He was just standing in the corner, staring at everyone. I didn't recognize him, but I figured he was just someone's friend who was too drunk to socialize. His eyes, though, they were locked on everyone, like he was studying them. One of my friends came up to me and asked if I'd seen the masked guy. I hadn't noticed anyone wearing a mask, so I asked what he was talking about. He said some dude was in a cheap Halloween mask wandering around the house earlier, trying to freak people out. I laughed it off, thinking it was just some dumb prank. But then I glanced back at the guy in the corner. He wasn't wearing a mask, but something about him made me feel uneasy. As the night went on, people kept talking about this masked guy, but no one could find him. It was like he just disappeared. Some of us thought it was a joke, or maybe someone left, but the vibe in the house started to get weird. Everyone was on edge. Around midnight, the party was still going, but I decided I'd had enough. I told my friends I was leaving, but one of them mentioned they lost their phone and asked if I could help them look for it. We went back down to the basement, thinking maybe it fell somewhere. That's when I saw the guy from earlier, still standing in the corner, still staring. But this time, he was facing us. We tried to ignore him and kept looking for the phone. While we were searching, I heard the basement door creak. I looked up and saw someone in a plain white mask standing at the top of the stairs. They were just standing there, motionless, watching us. Everyone stopped what they were doing. We all stared at this person, expecting them to say something, but they just stood there. It wasn't funny anymore. The masked person started slowly walking down the stairs, and that's when we realized the guy in the corner was moving too. He started walking towards us in sync with the person on the stairs. That's when we panicked. We all rushed up the stairs, shoving each other to get out of the basement. But as we reached the top, we saw two more masked people in the kitchen, blocking the exit. They weren't saying anything, just standing there, watching us. It felt like some kind of twisted setup. The lights suddenly went out, and people started screaming. In the chaos, I grabbed my friend and bolted for the back door. We ran outside, hearts pounding, and didn't stop running until we were a couple of blocks away. Later, we found out that those masked people weren't just some random pranksters. They were targeting parties like us. Apparently, they'd done this before, creeping people out, but then it escalated to actual attacks. We were lucky to get out when we did. The police never caught them. What freaks me out is knowing how easily we could have been another one of their victims. I haven't gone to another house party since. This party was supposed to be low-key, just a few people, drinks, and some music. It was held in an old, abandoned warehouse that one of my friend's cousins somehow had access to. The place was run down, but had that gritty, cool vibe that everyone thought would be perfect for a night out. When I got there, the music was loud and people were already dancing and laughing. The lights were dim and the air felt thick, which made me kind of uneasy. But I brushed it off. Everyone else was having fun, so I figured I was just overthinking it. As the night went on, more people showed up. Some faces I recognized, others I didn't. But that's normal at parties, right? You don't always know everyone. At one point, I noticed a guy standing near the back wall, not really joining in, but just watching. I assumed he was someone's friend and moved on. Then, around midnight, someone suggested playing a game, something like hide and seek, but with a twist. The idea was to pair up and hide somewhere in the warehouse while one person hunted everyone down. The last pair to get caught would win a prize. I ended up getting paired with a girl I didn't know well. We found a spot in the small room that looked like it used to be some kind of office. It was cramped and smelled musty, but we figured it was a good hiding place. We heard footsteps in the distance, people laughing, and the occasional shout when someone got found. But then everything went quiet. The music was still playing faintly in the background, but the chatter and laughter had died down completely. Minutes passed, then more, and we started getting nervous. We figured someone had found us already and was just messing with us. But when we stepped out to check, the hallway was empty. No one was around, and the place felt way colder than it had earlier. We walked through the warehouse, calling out to see if the game was still on, but there was no answer. Just silence, except for that guy I'd seen earlier, standing at the far end of the corridor. I asked him if he'd seen anyone, but he just stared back without saying a word. That's when I noticed something was off. His clothes were dirty, like they hadn't been washed in a while, and his eyes had this weird blank look. I grabbed my partner's arm and we backed away slowly, deciding to head for the main area of the warehouse. When we got there, the party was over. I don't mean it was winding down. I mean, it was like it never even happened. The lights were off and the place was completely empty. No sign of the DJ, no cups or bottles scattered around. Nothing. Just darkness and silence, like the whole thing was a mirage. My phone had no signal and the girl's phone was dead. We started panicking, trying to figure out what happened. When we heard footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate. We turned around and it was the guy from earlier, now holding something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but he kept walking towards us without saying a word. We didn't wait to find out what he wanted. We ran out of there as fast as we could and didn't stop until we were far away. When we finally made it back to the main road, we ran into one of our friends who looked just as freaked out as we did. He told us after the game started, people started disappearing. One by one, they just vanished without a trace. The others assumed they were just hiding really well, but eventually, no one could find them, and people started to leave. The next day, we started asking around to see if anyone else knew what happened, but nobody remembered much. It's like the whole night was a blur. A few days later, we found out that the warehouse was condemned years ago after a series of violent crimes took place there. They said a guy used to lure people there under the guise of parties and trap them inside. I stayed away from that part of town after that. The more I think about it, the less I want to know what really happened that night. It was just supposed to be a small get-together at Jenna's place. Nothing too wild, just a few friends hanging out. We were all in high spirits, having a few drinks, chatting, and enjoying each other's company. The kind of night where everything seems normal and nothing feels out of place. Around midnight, Jenna's neighbor, a guy we barely knew, showed up. His name was Scott. He looked a bit off, but we figured he was just shy or something. He brought along a case of craft beers and said he wanted to join us. We thought it was a bit strange, but we were all pretty buzzed and didn't think much of it. Scott seemed to take an unusual interest in everything we were doing. He kept asking questions about our lives, our plans, and who we were seeing. It was odd, but we brushed it off as him just being overly curious. As the night went on, Scott became more intrusive. He started wandering around the house, poking into rooms we hadn't used. When we asked him what he was doing, he just mumbled something about looking for a place to sit, even though there were plenty of spots available. The party started to wind down and people began to leave. Scott lingered, making small talk and refusing to leave. It was getting late and Jenna and I were cleaning up when we heard a loud noise coming from the back room. It sounded like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. We went to check it out and found Scott standing by the window, looking out with a weird, almost frantic expression. When he saw us, he quickly turned around, looking guilty and nervous. He started muttering about how he'd been curious about us, about wanting to see what we were really like. Jenna tried to get him to leave, but he was evasive and kept changing the subject. He pulled out a notebook from his bag and started scribbling in it frantically. It was filled with strange notes and random details about our conversations, things he shouldn't have known. We finally decided to call the police when he refused to leave. They arrived and took him away, but he didn't resist. The whole situation felt surreal. After he was gone, Jenna and I found a notebook he'd left behind. It was full of bizarre notes about us, our names, some personal details, and unsettling observations. We never found out what his real intentions were or why he was so obsessed with us.